So there we are. Did you work out where Peter did good and where he did bad? I mean, in one sense, it's quite obvious and easy, isn't it? Peter starts by answering the question that Jesus puts to him, "Who do you say I am?" in a way that causes Jesus to commend him and say, "Well done." And then later, Peter says something else that doesn't have the same reaction from Jesus and seems to cause Jesus to possibly lose his temper. So in that sense, it's quite simple, but I think we can dig deeper than that. We can look at what each person said in these two bits of dialogue, see what we can take from that. And given that our sermon series is about what we can learn from Peter, and identifying how Peter exhibits the sort of traits and characteristics that we all share, I want to encourage us all to put ourselves into the place of Peter as we go through that passage together. So, we start with the question, or perhaps the questions, because Jesus asks two questions of his disciples here. The first one is a general inquiry about who other people, people around them, outsiders, who they say he is. And the disciples give their responses, no doubt, based on the things that they have heard people say. But then he seems to ignore all that stuff about what others think, and he hones in on a question that seems to really matter. Who do you say I am? So imagine you are Peter. Jesus is asking you to ignore what everyone else says and simply to answer the question for yourself. Who do you say I am? What strikes me about this is that by asking this question in two parts, I wonder if Jesus is wanting us to almost discount that bit about what others think. And that's quite pertinent. How many times when people ask us or talk to us about faith or God or the church, how many times do we reply in a general sense? We talk about what the church does. We talk about what people believe, perhaps rather than answering a question directly with our own belief, our own response. Maybe we worry about what the person asking will think of us. Maybe we worry it won't meet their expectations. And I'm not just talking about people from outside church asking us. If you're anything like me, sometimes someone, a great and a good person of the church asks you a question about your faith, and you think, oh, what do they want me to say here? Rather than what I actually think. We don't like to nail our colours to the mast sometimes. We don't like to risk ridicule or further awkward questioning. But Jesus is very clear on this. He's interested in your response, not the response of others. Now, in terms of Peter's response, this seems to be definitely a time when he's progressing forward rather than falling backwards, as he puts aside any fear and he declares, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." I like to imagine a hush after that sentence where everyone waits to hear how Jesus will respond and whether he'll drop another one of his trademark answer a question with another question moments that he's become famous for. But actually, Jesus' response seems to be simply one of joy. He praises Peter on his honesty and his declaration of faith. He doesn't make it more complicated than it needs to be. He doesn't demand more information. But his praise of Peter is fulsome. "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Incidentally, these sentences that talk about binding and loosing probably refer to terms that the rabbis used at the time, and when they used to speak about whether something was permissible or not according to the law. Jesus is referencing the fact that Peter was to become, and indeed did become, a leader in the early church with responsibilities for its practices and its beliefs. Certainly, Jesus is promising a great and important future for Peter. And I think if I were Peter, I would be feeling rather pleased at Jesus' response. It's nice to be told we've got things right, isn't it? When someone, particularly someone whose opinion we respect, says, "You've done well, you're right," that's a good feeling. It can elevate us to a happy place. We walk away with a spring in our step. We feel like we're on cloud 9. I wonder if Peter was in this state of elation, and maybe a little bit of pride, when we hear the later discussion from our reading. But if Peter was of the opinion that Jesus' response meant that Peter was now the authority on all things, that he knew everything about everything, he would swiftly be disabused of that notion. This time, rather than a question, Jesus is explaining about some of the things that will come to pass as he fulfills his mission on earth. And he's talking, of course, about the coming events of Easter, when he would be lifted high by the people of Jerusalem and welcomed into the city, only to be attacked, condemned, and punished by those in power. And with this, even the people would turn against him, and he'd be made an example of violently and be strung up on a cross and left to die. Perhaps Peter, still riding high on the praise that Jesus had spoken over him earlier, can't even begin to comprehend this. It's not within his ability to contemplate that such events could take place. Verse 22 amused me when I was studying it for this service. I love the way it says, Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." I love that vision of a Peter who's now so sure in his unwavering belief, in his own vision of Jesus and what the future's going to hold, that he takes it upon himself to offer up some sage words of advice to Jesus. A bit like a school teacher who takes a student to one side to give them a calm but stern talking to. And not in front of the other disciples, you'll notice. Oh no, this bit of advice from Peter is far too important to be told in front of everyone. He doesn't want to embarrass Jesus by correcting him. It might make Jesus feel a bit silly. Does our own certainty in our faith sometimes, perhaps, make us behave in a way that would suggest we know it all? Our view is definitive. We have all the answers and people just need to listen to us. Jesus, it is fair to say, is not amused by Peter's words. "Get behind me, Satan," he replies. "You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Well, that seems a bit uncalled for, doesn't it? Get behind me, Satan. I think it seems so uncalled for because, well, in all likelihood, Peter's comment comes from a place of love for Jesus. Of course he doesn't want to see Jesus tortured and killed. Of course he doesn't want to contemplate that the situation, which seems at the moment to be going so well, might crash and burn and change. The things that Jesus is now telling them must happen do not fit the narrative that Peter wants to believe. And so the only thing he can do is deny them. "This will never happen," are Peter's exact words. Denying things are real or true, or even possible because we don't like to think about the ramifications if it were true, doesn't really sound like that bad a transgression, does it? After all, Jesus was all about promoting joy and peace, not proclaiming how awful everything was and will be. But I think there's a problem when that unflinching idea of how things must always work out the way we want them to be gets in the way of our ability to see the reality of a situation. It can blind us to some of the real truths of the world around us. When Jesus accuses Peter of not having in mind the concerns of God, but only having mere human concerns, I think he's saying to Peter, you don't know everything. And if you can't accept the truths that other people tell you, you're of no use to me. You see, to be followers of Christ, to bring good and light into this world, we need to be able to recognize the things that aren't so good. We need to have the humility to hear about the situations that are not working and not convince ourselves that actually it is all perfect and it's all fine, and if people think it isn't, they should change their view because it doesn't match ours. The danger of this way of thinking seems, to me at least, prevalent at the moment. It's present in our politics, in our discourse, in our conversations. Here is my view, which is correct. If you say there's a problem, I don't hear that because I haven't viewed it as being a problem. Therefore, it isn't one and everything's fine. Never, Lord, said Peter. That will never happen to you. Does anyone here have Netflix? Netflix at home? I do. I watched a film on it last week called Don't Look Up. Have you heard of this film? I suppose it's a disaster film, really. It's about an asteroid that's heading towards Earth that has the potential to destroy the planet and wipe out all life. But thankfully, there are some scientists who have spotted it in time to do something about it. There's just one problem. The President of the United States has no interest in doing anything about it because she doesn't think it's going to poll very well. The president's supporters don't want to hear stuff like this. They only want to hear how great the president is doing. So the scientists bypass the president and they go straight to the press. But the press don't tell the story either. It doesn't fit their agendas. There's no viewing figures in telling people what they don't want to hear, only in telling people the sorts of things they do want to hear. As the asteroid gets closer, the overriding chant becomes, "Don't look up." If you don't look at it, don't acknowledge it, then it's not there and it can't hurt you. There are obvious dangers in willfully ignoring or disbelieving things that people are trying to tell us. And this is a real phenomenon which I gather has come to be known as collective denial. And climate scientists have spoken powerfully about their frustration at being ridiculed, their years of work and study torn up because the consequences are too inconvenient for people to want to hear. And on this Sunday of racial justice, we're reminded that just because we have not personally experienced a problem, and we don't want to think that we live in a society that has a problem, does not mean that there is no problem. We must not deny the warning, the message of others because it makes us feel challenged or uncomfortable. And we must constantly guard ourselves that our belief system, our faith, is one of doing what Jesus would do, not what is the most comfortable thing for us to believe. And that might mean swallowing our pride. It might mean accepting that not everything is awesome. The message of Jesus, the Son of God, is good news, but it has never been promised to be easy news. Ultimately, if we ignore the warnings about things not being right, I think we often do it to try and make our own lives more tolerable, more comfortable, less depressing. But that, I think, falls squarely perhaps into the topic of mere human concerns, as Jesus put it. Whoever wants to be my disciple, Jesus said, must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? This series is about failing forward. And the truth is that sometimes, in order to move forward, that means we have to acknowledge the failures. Sometimes our own failures, sometimes the failures of others, or sometimes just to acknowledge that things are not always going to be the way we would wish or the way we expect them to be. But in acknowledging such things, we take an important, a vital step in being able to put them right, to help others before ourselves. And Jesus promises a great ending if we can do this. Verse 27, for the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels. Then he will reward each person according to what they have done. We can do so much. You can do so much if we can accept the things that need to change, the things that need us to put away our pride and our want to be right, and really put others' needs first. I wonder if that is what failing forward is all about. Amen.